Hey, my name is Steven, and today I'll be telling you about designing variable fonts with RoboFont Skateboard. So if you're wanting to learn to skateboard, one of the first things worth knowing is that it involves technique, agility, and courage. Okay, maybe this is a little bit too abstract, actually. Let's base this more in reality. All right, today we'll be talking about RoboFont Skateboard, which is a brilliant extension for RoboFont, my font editor of choice. And RoboFont allows you to preview how a variable font will look in its variability. So you can zoom around a design space, sort of like you might skateboard around a city. That's my take on why it has that name anyway. It's super useful, and instead of delving into a really extensive design space like this, I'll be giving a much simpler few examples of how you would use RoboFont practically in like a nitty-gritty designing a new font scenario. There are a few disclosures worth mentioning. I am not being paid for this by any means. This product is made by Eric von Blockland, and he is a former teacher of mine. He is a brilliant type designer and coder, and he has done a lot to kind of move typography forward over the last couple of decades, at least. And he is a guy I really admire, so I am happy to support him, and I hope you might decide to do the same thing after seeing what this cool tool can do for you. I am also using this as an opportunity to advertise my own fonts. If you want some cool type, I hope you look at aerotype.com. Or if you want some custom type or some help with a typeface, I hope you reach out and say hello. I love to help people make good type. Some context for this tool is that it works in RoboFont with UFO font files on Mac OS. So there are lots of different ways to make typefaces, and there are lots of different ways to make variable fonts. This happens to be the workflow that I like to use best, but by all means, there are others. So there are also some foundational concepts, just in case you're pretty new to typography and maybe you're looking to make your first variable font. There are things you really need to know that, maybe you already know a few of these. I'm going to be starting with kind of some basics as far as like the technical side goes. But skip a few minutes in if you can do that. If you're really bored by these definitions. But Bezier curves are mathematical descriptions of shapes. These are what we use to draw glyphs. So this letter N is called a glyph, and a single Bezier path that's closed is called a contour. If you zoom in, one section or one Bezier curve is called a segment. And then control points become really important to know about. These are the coordinate points that we move around, and these dictate the shape of each Bezier curve. So each of these little arrows is pointing to a control point. I might refer to the ones on the curve as an on-curve point and the ones off the curve as off curves, or I sometimes call them handles. I don't know how technically correct that is, but I think of them as little handles that allow me to drag around that curve. Today, we'll be focusing a lot on a concept called interpolation, and the basic definition of that is just moving between 2 points and finding an intermediate value. So if you've got point A and point B, if you want to go 66% of the way across, it's somewhere around point T there. T stands for time, if you're curious. Interpolation in the world of fonts is more about moving between sets of coordinate points, like contours, to generate in-between contours. So an easy example that I like to think about is you have two squares or two rectangles, rectangle A, rectangle B. They each have 4 points. So if you go in the middle of each of those 4 points, you can get a new contour. You might call it contour T. And you can do the same thing with a light N and a bold N. The middle contour would look something like this. Maybe that's your regular or your medium style in a font family. Compatibility becomes an important issue. This is saying whether contours are compatible, which means essentially that they're related pretty closely in point structure. And you might also say that an entire UFO is compatible with another UFO, and that's a higher bar to clear. But An easy thing to look at is something that's not compatible. So a serif N will probably have a lot more points than a sans serif N, and these two shapes are not compatible because of it. We'll actually be looking in a few moments at what we would do to make these two shapes compatible, and that's something that Skateboard can kind of help you out with. So beyond interpolation, there's also a concept of extrapolation, and this is related, but basically if you've got point A and point B and you want to continue that trend, it's extrapolation. So you might look at what is 130% of the way to point B. And you can do this in fonts too. Another thing that Skateboard will help you with, actually, you can have a light, a bold, and then you go way beyond what the bold is, and you can generate a ultra bold. Sometimes this is risky though. You might have shapes resulting that don't actually look good or work well until you kind of manually go in and fix them up. And this is, I believe, the main reason that variable fonts don't allow extrapolation. There are merely interpolation systems for the user. So as a type designer, you think about extrapolation as a way to get new territories of your design space. The design space is the area of possibility within a variable typeface. And so here's a simple diagram, just like maybe you'd have a really light to a really bold, and that whole thing is a diagram of a weight axis variable font. Both of those ends of it would be a source drawing, one of the fonts that you draw to make up the structure of the design space. So a more typical weight axis might look a little more like this, where you've got one end of the spectrum, the other end, and then probably at least one thing in the middle to kind of finesse your control of that system. You'd also want to think about instances, which in a variable font or design space, each location within that is an instance. So even if you just draw 3 sources, the cool thing about interpolation is that it can give you 12 or 100 or almost infinite amount of instances in between your sources. And then it gets really fun when you start to think about multidimensional design spaces. This is a long word. It basically means that you have more than one parameter that can be controlled within a design space. So maybe you'd have optical size, like the intention of the size that a font is going to be used at. You'd draw it differently for small sizes versus large sizes. And maybe a large size would have a more extreme weight axis, as I'm showing here. You can get a little bit complicated. Here's my font recursive. The design space for this has to be 4-dimensional. So this kind of shows that it's 3-dimensional, but you've got kind of an additional layer of dimensionality there. We won't go into that quite, but this is something that Skateboard will help you navigate. You can kind of navigate 2 dimensions at once and go between which dimensions you're navigating. So that can be really useful for design. But without further discussing of definitions, I think we're ready to launch into some demos. So let's look at an example of how we might use Skateboard to help during a design process. I'll also go through a couple of basics about setting up a design space, just so I'm not skipping over anything major. So there's actually another extension by Eric von Blockland, who made Skateboard, called Design Space Edit. And you can install that extension and then hit new. And you could also just start a design space from scratch in a code editor, but I never remember exactly the syntax, and I guess I should probably make some snippets, but this is just so much easier. So we have a few options. We've got to set up our axes, our sources, and then we could also set up instances and rules. Let's add open UFOs just to start. And they're both bold, I guess. One of them is, I don't think the style name actually matters so much. We'll add an axis. We'll call this axis serif. And I don't know what the tag should be. There's probably, well, I know there's existing serif fonts, but we'll just go with this for now. And I'll give it a 0 to 1 because it's sort of I think of it as a binary thing. There's either serifs or not, or if there's semi-serifs, it's a 0.5. All right, so I will save this design space, and I'll just do it in the same folder as these two sources. I'll call it skateboard example. That design space is the file extension. Cool. So now that we've got that, it's actually quickly worth looking at what a design space actually looks like in a code editor. So let's pop it open. And here's what this design space looks like. So it's XML, which is a lot like HTML, if you're familiar with that. There are axes described. This just has one, but it could have more. There's kind of a default source where things are marked as like, this is the thing for the groups and the features and the info. And then there's another source. If we added instances, it would be another kind of section like this. So yeah, this works pretty well. I actually really prefer using Visual Studio Code here, or a code editor, to edit a design space rather than the design space edit extension, because you can just be so much faster if you know a few ways to get around. So like if I wanted to change the axis name for everything, I could just like this, for instance, and then do Command D a few times, and then I could change the naming of something all at once. You know, you could also interact with this in Python, but this is usually a pretty simple way to go. All right, so getting back to Skateboard itself, let's pop open Skateboard, and we will open this design space. And here we have it. So let me put this in a new window so it's a little bit easier to look at. To explain the interface real quickly, this will open Design Space Edit, the extension we just looked at. This will add a glyph to all of our sources, which is pretty handy. So if we wanted to add like ampersand, it's so cool. It has the Unicode already as well, so we can add it. And here we see that both of our UFOs now have that empty glyph. We can pop open a text window and a space window. And a thing that's funny so far is that, all right, we're ignoring the axis, but if we make it horizontal, suddenly we'll see it in our design space. But of course, we also need to make our glyphs compatible for this to work at all. So let's go do that and look at how Skateboard can help us to achieve compatibility. All right, so I'm going to show a few things that I had turned off earlier, so I kind of need metrics. Okay, and also for this, I will use point indices to show where my points are. Start point is 0. Let me also show the start point. These are things that are pretty handy to have when designing a font for compatibility specifically. So you can see there's so many more points here than on the other one. There's a few ways we could do this. I guess for now, I'll just try throwing this in the background and using that as a little bit of a helper to make me know where to go. And basically, to make this compatible, I just need points here. As many points need to flex into the serif. So I'm going to grab my cutting tool, and let's just kind of start cutting. And we won't necessarily make this super perfect right away. Well, we could do something a little clever here. So let's grab this, pop it up, and I'm going to add a guide. Let me throw this behind again. Okay, it already is. All right, that'll just make it slightly faster to add these. And let's add another guide approximately where we want these serifs to go. And then a key thing here is to get our tool and option click on each of these segments that are going to need off-curve points. And we'll just leave the off-curves flat there. And I'll do it up here as well. And this is 164 tall, so I will also make this 164 tall. I'll use the scaling edit extension, super important for me. Let's see. Okay. And let's go ahead and just like make these smooth points just to be nice. And I think it's not quite compatible because Skateboard is showing us these two glyphs in the background, and it would be showing us like a preview if it were compatible, but it might be close. So let me set this to be the start point, and I want, I'm using another Eric von Blockland extension called Edit That Next Master to go between them. So master is another name for source. Reverse contours. Okay. So I'm clearly missing something here. At this point, I might start counting the points, and that's why I show the point indices sometimes. So there's 40 points here, 40 points there. It might, let's go back over to Skateboard. No, something's missing, but what the heck would it be? A quick little preview tool I can use, aside from Skateboard, just to double check. This one's cool. It's called DeLorean by CJ Dunn. So this is... Oh, here's what it is. All right. I should have been able to see that right off the bat. Let's open this with the US code as well, so we see it in two ways. Here's the thing I forgot to set. It's the dimension. They're both the same. So how should like you can't interpolate between 0 and 0. So the serif one should have a value that is maximum, and so space window, text window, heck yes. All right, here we've got the middle interpolation of our sans and our serif. So it kind of becomes a nice flared serif here, and it's a nice full serif there. And I can see why designers like doing this sort of thing, because it looks pretty darn cool. Another thing we could do, for instance, if we don't like the copper plate look of this, like where, you know, or like, let's say we don't like the flaring of this. We want it to maybe look a little more like copper plate or something of that sort. Let's move this out of the way. And here's what Skateboard will show us as kind of a background preview while we're editing. All right, so I've got these, and I want this semi-serif to have like sharper flares. So what I can do here is just pop these down and even overlap them potentially. And you can see that now these are really sharp little points, which is, you know, maybe more what you want. And that's kind of got a different look to it. It's pretty subtle though, right? So maybe we would also want to do something like, let me edit those changes backwards. Let's see what might happen if we bring these serifs a lot tighter. So you can see that as we're moving over here, now we're getting more of a copper plate sort of font look here. So that's kind of cool. We might even want to make these nubs more prominent when it's a small font like that, or a small serif rather. I don't know. So you can definitely tweak things around, change them. Maybe you'd also want to change the other side. Like maybe we don't like that this is kind of angle, but not much of an angle. So in that case, well, we could do a couple of things. If we really wanted the angle here, that would start to tell us that we might want a third source to be in the middle where the angle goes away. Or maybe you decide that you want to keep your design space simpler, and so you just decide to pop this up and get it nice and flat. Of course, then we want to kind of get our points to match a little more here. But yeah, so now we have kind of style 1, a copper platey thing in between, and a serif here. Maybe let's look at one more example of where we might change a design to kind of better unite a sans and a serif. So here the S is not yet compatible, and again, the serifs are basically the reason why. We'll need to have kind of flat bits here and here, and basically these two structures aren't very compatible. Like this is at an angle and the other one is vertical. So I think that, you know, we could do something weird, and then we also need an extra kind of point between. This will be really tricky to get right, but it'll be kind of cool potentially. All right, we need, okay, hey, it's compatible, and that's what the beautiful inner style looks like. This is a good example of what happens if our start point is way off. So if we make it more similar, all right, so we've got something that at least looks like an S between these two shapes. So here's a nice sans, here's a nice serif, and then in the middle, it's some sort of a semi-serif. But we have kinks. And here's another big part of this demo that actually is pretty useful to talk through. So this is probably one of the major reasons that Skateboard exists in the first place. Kinks are a little hard to avoid if you don't know how to avoid them, and then if you don't have a tool to help you detect when they'll happen and kind of help you along to fixing them. So a kink, if we zoom in, if it's not really clear already, let's make this, oops. Let's make this window nice and big. You can see that this isn't a smooth curve, it's kinked right here. And then the same thing happens here, because we just kind of put those points in without thinking too hard about where they would go. Kinks can happen for really two reasons. One reason is that the point changes angle. So we normally draw with either totally vertical or totally horizontal kind of on curve and off curve units of, I call these handles. And one reason is that that's really easy to control on a grid. But another reason is that it helps to avoid kinks, because you'll never have to worry about a kink if you're interpolating from like here to here. It's just smooth the whole way, which is pretty nice. Same thing if you're interpolating from here to here. But if you have an angled point like this, and especially if the, well, if the angle stays the same between two sources, then you also actually don't have a problem, because it's still just linear interpolation and it can interpolate the whole way. But if you do have to change angle, as we do here, because it goes from angled to flat, you have to get it to match a ratio of this handle to this handle. And we can see that for our serif style, the ratio is something like 4:1 approximately. But it'd be a little bit annoying to have to put a number to that. So what we can instead do is change this. And in the background, you can actually see that Skateboard, that's a preview from Skateboard, is showing us that our ratio is becoming green or kind of acceptable to avoid kinks. But of course, it's actually not great because the interpolation no longer has a kink, but it still looks kind of like terrible, right? So maybe we can scale it in some kind of a way. And actually, I really like to draw with this transform tool because it kind of allows you to not adjust or mess with the ratio of your handles, but you can kind of adjust the outline. But here it's just not working. So we actually have another way to get what we want. So let's kind of step back a little bit to get this curve looking okay as a sans curve. And we'll basically have it in the middle, right? And you know, it's maybe not 100% perfect, but it looks okay. So what we can do actually here, we may be able to change our ratio to make it better. And let's put this essentially in the middle here and drag it. And maybe there's a point here where the serif looks okay and the semi-serif looks okay. But honestly, what this preview is helping me see is that it's, even if we resolve this kink issue, it kind of looks bad. Oh, another thing you can do here that's kind of fun is you can navigate a skateboard window from kind of right within your drawing space. So it's basically you click and drag, and it's the same as clicking and dragging within this. So even if you've got, say, 2 dimensions in here, you can click and drag up and down to do the y-axis or left to right to do the x-axis. So let's make this look, well, let's try at least to make this something that might be a little better. You know what? I'm going to delete this and see what happens if I add it up here instead. So basically, this can be horizontal again and a lot less disruptive than a kind of point in the middle that is angled. And actually, I will use the transform tool here to make this curve more shallow. All right, so that's looking decent, I guess. You know, maybe we would have quibbles with it, but you know, it looks approximately like a humanist sans serif S. And to have a similar structure down below, let me just like lop this one off. So I'm going to hold Option Delete, paste the top again, go to Transform, hold Option, and click to rotate. And then I'm going to scale this over and scale this over to be maybe approximately where we had it before, using the background to kind of guide myself. And then I can just kind of shuffle it to connect that and connect this like so. And then maybe get these to be smooth on the bottom. All right, so I really enjoy drawing and using the transform tool as much as possible because it kind of allows you to just think about making shapes in sort of different ways than you can if you're strictly dragging points around. Okay, so now the really fun moment is that since we've made these changes, we can now preview them. And I imagine that it will go better, but I don't actually know yet what will happen here. So let's bring our skateboard navigator. Oops. Our start point is messed up again because we, well, I'll show that, how messed up it is. Yeah, because we had done the copy and paste. So I'm going to grab this, make it a start point. Okay. Ooh, ouch. So experiment shows that that totally did not work how I wanted it to. Sometimes these things don't work how you want them to. Let's show our space window again to make it more obvious where we are. So yeah, it kind of just, I mean, it looks cool in one way, and it's not kinking, but also looks like crap mostly. I think I'll just simplify the serif S. So I'm going to pop this one in the background in case I want to save it. But otherwise, let's just simplify it. Maybe like this. And it still, you know, pretty much looks like a good looking serif S. But we no longer need to do this clever, weird thing with these double flat points at top. And now, all right, that looks like a decent semi-serif S. Way better than before. Pretty cool. My problem now is that as I'm making this, I suddenly want to make a serif to sans variable font. Hey, there are only a couple of them so far. There could be more in the world. All right, so the last thing I should really say about the S is that this kink issue also really applies here. It's not causing kinks that are very noticeable because the angle of these spines is pretty close to the same between the serif and the sans serif versions. But it could be better. So this is the problem I was talking about with if the angle changes and the ratio changes, then it's going to kink. So you have to either keep the angle the same or the ratio the same. And that's particularly tricky on an S with a structure like this. So if we highlight it, we can see that it's actually changing by a lot. And so Skateboard shows it to us in red. And actually, I'm cutting in on an update later. Usually in the past, when I've corrected this, you know, I've checked for the red versus green background there. And maybe I've gone to the other sources and checked the ratio here. And I didn't realize actually until just recently that you can actually continue seeing that status preview, the red-green thing, even if you are sliding things around. So I thought that you had to kind of remember, but actually there's a really handy feature in Skateboard. If I go to the main selection tool and I right click and I make a selection, like I'm interested in both sides of this spine, I can go to the Skateboard item in the menu and then say track selection in S. And now that lights up in the background and it's there wherever I go. And so, you know, I could basically fix this in one source or the other, or I could make a blend between them. I think, you know, this can probably have a bit of a flatter spine. So we'll start to correct the issue here. And already it's showing us that this one is green. And we can see in this middle instance, like, even if there might be technically some little kinks here, they're pretty invisible to the naked eye. You'd have to maybe do a bit of math to really get a sense of it. It's a bit of a tricky thing to really get perfectly right, but right. It's helpful. It's a lot better, in my opinion, than having no ability to play with it. And then, or like no visibility into the system, I would say. And the other thing that this allows us to do is when we have a green preview, right now, the angle of our spine doesn't change by too much. It's pretty much the same between these two sources. And so that also helps reduce the amount of kinking. But now that our ratios are really similar, we could do something like making this sans-serif S have a really like almost horizontal spine. The thing that this would be really helpful for is if you're going from a really narrow style to a really wide style and expanded, like condensed to expanded styles, you would tend to probably want to have a flatter spine in the expanded styles. Otherwise, you would get what Eric calls kind of a paperclip S, where it looks like weirdly bent and horizontal in the middle. It always takes me quite a bit of fuzzing to get S's that I even remotely like, and I'm not fully convinced about this solution just yet, but hopefully this shows that you can go from relatively different angles in this kind of a complex curve and have no perceptible kinks in the middle thanks to the help of Skateboard. So it's, you know, maybe an isolated use case. You don't have too many glyphs in a typeface that are like this. And this also does get a little trickier in a wider design space. You know, even with 2 sources, it's a challenge. But if we had 4 sources or 8 sources or 16 sources, this kind of thing is a lot of work. But when you have a tool that at least gives you a good, clear indication of what's happening in the middle, it's a lot less guesswork, which is really nice. By the way, this is called a compound or inflected curve, where usually you'd have a middle point here so that your curves were controllable on each side. But actually, when you get into the realm of variable fonts, compound curves can be super helpful. Maybe not in this specific case, we'll see. But they can be super helpful to make transformations that would otherwise be very difficult to make in a way that looks good. So let's see. Now they're pointy. Let's see if they will turn in a way that looks pleasing. Yeah, like not bad. I like that. I did want to point out extrapolation. This is another really cool feature of Skateboard. So varlib is the default math library, Python library that's used to show how we interpolate within a system. Mutator math is another system designed by Eric von Blackland that has the special ability of allowing extrapolation. So here's where we can really explore and see, like, what if we continued this path? Oh my God. It's like a balloon. It's kind of fun. Or trousers or something. Very weird. Pretty entertaining. Or what if we get the long serifs? Oh my gosh. So it kind of looks okay in a very funky way all the way over here and kind of a little less so, but maybe over here. So what we could do with this information, I'm trying to decide which is the more entertaining side of this. I mean, clearly this side, I guess. But yeah, I mean, this is just the more obvious side. So what we can do is use preview UFO, and where compatible glyphs get generated. And we could even go and add this new UFO to our design space and then extend our system so that we could have like I don't know, an anti-serif over on the minimum side, and then somewhere in the middle we could have sans-serif, and then at the far end we could have serif. And I won't actually go through doing that because it's pretty much the same process of setting up a design space. You just add another source and point to the right URL or file path rather, and make sure your dimensions are set up, and then you can continue to skate around your design space. Another quick update is that I've also realized that I don't necessarily need vertical terminals on the sans side to interpolate into the serif. We could also go back to our earlier shape. So let's kind of go between layers here, and we'll add a couple of quick notches here so that these can interpolate. We can even overlap those points. And now let's look at if this is working. Yeah, not too bad. It's kind of got like a Devine look almost in here, or like DJR's Roslindale. And that's kind of a cool, different approach. Now, it would be a bigger challenge, I think, to make a full variable font that looked good doing this. And I'm not about to, you know, expand my family name Sans into a serif axis because I think that would have maybe limited use. But who knows? No promises either way. It's just very fun to look at how you can do this kind of thing and how Skateboard allows you to kind of explore a design space and play like that. All right, so in the last couple of minutes here, I want to just quickly give an overview of other features in Skateboard, and in particular, how Skateboard sort of interacts with a much larger design space. So far we were just looking at literally connecting only two sources, which most fonts will have more than two sources. Most fonts won't have 24 sources, which the full design space of my project Recursive has. But this is kind of a stress test, and it'll help us to talk about a few things. So first of all, we still get to navigate around our Skateboard space here, or our design space. And Skateboard has a readout of all of the axes. And in particular, an important thing to know about is that there's an interaction thing here. So for instance, earlier we were just, we only had a serif thing going. So we could say only do a weight axis if that's all we wanted to look at. And we can even kind of type in here. So let's say I want to go to halfway through the casual axis of Recursive, kind of what I think of as a semi-casual. Well, this just locks it. If I enter it in as text here, it locks it to that. And I can see the weight scale along with these instance locations at that semi-casual state. But I could also map this onto the vertical axis, and suddenly I can see full casual, full linear in the weight axis. I could throw it in the middle, for instance, if I wanted to kind of work out a particular area and say, you know, make sure the E looks good and kink free at that semi-casual setting, or, you know, any letter really. Sometimes it's also useful to say combine two axes, and it's always a 2D navigation with Skateboard, so you know, you only have 2 dimensions to play with on a screen. But if you stack axes, so right now we've got our monospace and our casual on the vertical axis, on the y-axis. So you can see that I'm going between, maybe let's get some better letters here. Like, you can see that it's going from proportional at the bottom to monospace up at the top, but it's also going from this kind of regularized linear style to a nice and curvy, brushy, casual style at the top. So that's just one way that you can kind of interact. And it's really cool how fast this all is. Like I'm really zooming around here. I don't have the world's most powerful computer, but it handles this pretty well. And if I see a problem I don't like, I want to change, let's do that. We can like pop open a UFO right from this menu, and it'll take a moment to open because it's a big UFO. But like, let's take a look at how we might adjust, I don't know, the W. Right, so now we've got a darker W. And this isn't a change I want to necessarily make to the family as a whole. But for instance, that's how it impacts kind of this middle semi-casual, semi-monospace version. We could do it a much more extreme change, and that's when you start to see it. But this is only one source out of many, and it can be a sort of a mental challenge to know what changes in one source of a many source design space will have what impact on a certain given location. And it's sort of proximity based. It's something that would be hard to put into words or even know necessarily, but Skateboard can also help you kind of, if not fully understand it all the time, at least have a good way to guess and check, or to like literally see in front of you how much moving a point will affect a location. There's certainly more that could be said about making variable fonts and designing variable fonts that work well. I'm really grateful we have a tool like Skateboard to help in that process. I also totally skipped over a bunch of other tools that are really instrumental in my process, like Prepolator from Tal Lemming, Metrics Machine. I barely talked about RoboFont, but that's what all of this is based on. FontMake is my build tool. Actually, last year at Type Lab, I presented on that, so you could actually find that on my YouTube or probably through Typographics to see more of what I have to say about that. But anyhow, I'm really grateful we have some really great tools to use as type designers, and I hope this maybe inspired you to get out there and draw something for yourself. I'm Steven. My Foundry is Aerotype. If you want to see more tutorials like this, or I don't know, rambly work streams, I post those occasionally to my YouTube channel, which is just Aerotype, and to my Instagram, which is Aerotype. So thanks so much. Hope you're all having a really great time at Typographics this year, and best of luck to whatever you make next.